Zinnia Harrington is a ghost! My father roared, handing the keys to the kingdom to Indira like a trophy. They laughed as they erased my name, firing my world while I stood in the dark. But they forgot one thing. I didn't just survive their betrayal. I bought it. 51% majority. My company. My revenge. As the pen hit the paper, the heavens finally tore apart. The storm had been brewing for 3 years, a silent partner to my secret acquisitions. But as I watched my parents clink glasses to my sister's theft, the first drops began to hit the roof. The rain drumming against the skylights of the Harrington estate sounded less like weather and more like a closing argument. Inside the dining room, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of rosemary lamb and the metallic tang of old money. I sat at the far end of the massive mahogany table, watching the candlelight dance in the crystal glassware. My father, Lazarus, adjusted his silk cufflinks with a precision that bordered on surgical. Beside him, my sister Indira wore a smile so sharp it could have cut the very air between us. I remained in the shadows, a silent observer in a room where I was supposed to be family, yet felt like a ghost haunting my own life. "To the future," Lazarus announced, his voice booming over a sudden crack of thunder that made the chandeliers tremble. He stood tall, the patriarch in his prime, or so he wanted us to believe. A legacy is only as strong as the hands that hold it. It's time we acknowledge who has the grit to lead Harrington Global Logistics into the next decade. He gestured toward Indira, who preened under his gaze. She didn't just look like a successor. She looked like someone who had already spent the inheritance in her mind. Indira reached for her wine, the diamond on her finger catching the light as she clinked her glass against my untouched water. The sound was high and mocking. She slid a set of leather-bound folders across the table, the 49% stake transfer papers, signed and sealed. I looked at the documents, then at the faces of the people who shared my DNA. A house built on favoritism is a fortress made of glass, beautiful to look at, but destined to shatter under the weight of a single truth. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't earned, in a house I had spent 3 years quietly keeping solvent. "Zinnia, dear, don't look so somber," my mother Cressida murmured, her eyes flitting toward the rain-lashed windows. "We've made sure you're taken care of, but the company needs a firm hand. Indira has that edge." The word edge felt like a euphemism for cruelty. Lazarus then pushed a final, heavier folder toward me. It was a restrictive non-compete agreement, a 10-year gag order on my career. They weren't just passing the torch to Indira, they were trying to extinguish mine. Have you ever trusted someone you shouldn't have? Even if they shared your blood, the betrayal feels like a slow-acting poison. Lazarus cleared his throat, the sound dry and hollow. "There is one more thing, Zinnia. To ensure Indira has the necessary emergency liquidity for the merger, we've utilized the grandfathered guardianship clause." He said it so casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "We've liquidated your personal savings trust. Now it's for the good of the family name." The room went silent, the only sound being the frantic heartbeat thumping in my ears. They hadn't just bypassed me, they had robbed me. Every cent I had saved, every bonus I earned while working 80-hour weeks to fix Indira's logistical blunders was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my glass. Stoicism isn't the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of it. I looked at Cressida, who was obsessively smoothing the tablecloth. "Charity starts at home, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "But theft usually begins with a smile. I've always known money can't buy character, but I didn't think it would cost you your soul." Lazarus's face flushed a deep, angry crimson, but I didn't flinch. I had spent my life playing by their rules, hoping that if I was good enough, smart enough, or quiet enough, they would finally see me. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood with a definitive thud. I refused to touch the non-compete folder. "I will not sign a contract that asks me to apologize for being capable," I stated, my posture regal despite the weight pressing on my chest. I love this family, but I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm." Indira laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "You have nothing, Zinnia. No job, no trust fund, and soon, no home. You're a footnote." I looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. A woman so desperate for power she didn't realize she was standing on a trapdoor. "You transferred 49%, father," I said, leaning over the table just enough to catch the light. "But you should have checked the bylaws your father wrote. Specific restrictive covenants, unlike the one you're trying to force on me, require a majority vote of the primary shareholders. You're exactly 2% short." Lazarus sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "Minor details. The board will follow my lead." He was so certain of his gravity that he didn't realize he was already in freefall. I felt a strange sense of mercy for them, the kind you feel for someone walking toward a cliff in the dark. I walked out of the dining room, the massive mahogany doors closing behind me with a sound of finality. In the foyer, the air was cooler, smelling of wet earth and old stone. Cressida hurried after me, her silk dress rustling. "Zinnia, wait! Don't be difficult. It's for the best, you'll see. You are always the sensitive one." She reached for my arm, her touch hesitant. I gently removed her hand, feeling the distance between us growing into an unbridgeable canyon. "Forgiveness is a gift I give myself, Mother. But trust? Trust is a currency you've just spent your last cent of." The front door opened, and a gust of cold Illinois rain swept into the hall. A maid stepped forward, offering a monogrammed umbrella, but I shook my head. I preferred the honest chill of the storm to the suffocating heat of their lies. I stepped out onto the porch, and the rain soaking through my silk blouse instantly. It felt like a baptism. Behind me, the golden light of the estate looked dim, like a dying star. I wasn't losing a company. I was finally shedding a skin that no longer fit. Sometimes, walking away isn't an act of weakness. It's an act of war. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat, the interior smelling of worn leather and the remains of my morning coffee. My hands were steady as I reached for my encrypted phone. A single notification illuminated the cabin, a message from Avon that had arrived 3 minutes ago. "The 51% acquisition is locked. The boardroom is yours whenever you're ready, Chairman." I gripped the steering wheel, watching the lightning arc across the Lake Michigan horizon. They think they've given Indira the keys to the castle, and they forgot I'm the one who built the locks. I put the car in gear and began to circle back toward the city. The dawn over Chicago was a bruised purple, a cold and unforgiving light that offered no sanctuary. I spent the night in the backseat of my car, parked near the lakefront where the wind howled through the chassis. I watched the waves hit the concrete pier, relentless and rhythmic, reminding me that nature doesn't care about family disputes. My eyes were heavy, but my mind was a high-performance engine idling in the dark. By 8:30 a.m., I was standing beneath the towering glass needle of the Harrington Global Logistics headquarters. The skyscraper pierced the gray sky like a warning, its mirrored surface reflecting a version of me that looked far more dangerous than the girl who had been expelled from dinner only 12 hours prior. And I stepped through the heavy revolving doors, and the shift in atmosphere was immediate. The lobby usually buzzed with the hum of efficiency, but today, the air was electric with a jagged, nervous energy. People were huddled in small groups, their voices hushed, eyes darting toward the mezzanine. I walked across the polished marble, my footsteps echoing with an unwavering rhythm. I saw the faces of the couriers, the receptionists, and the mid-level managers. Many of them I had hired myself, knowing their names and the names of their children. I looked at them with a quiet, hidden compassion. They didn't know it yet, but their world was being dismantled by a woman who valued optics over operations. I walked to the VIP elevator and pressed the gold-rimmed button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, and a small red light flashed on the biometric scanner. Access denied. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased from the system I'd helped build. I guessed Indira's first move would be to lock the gates. I turned around and saw a long line of new security guards, men in tactical black suits, who didn't recognize me, standing at the bottom of the stairs. Above them, on the mezzanine balcony, Indira appeared. She wore a tailored crimson suit, the color of dried blood, the look of a conqueror observing a fallen city. "Stop the morning rush," Indira commanded, her voice amplified by the lobby's acoustics. "I have an announcement." The bustling crowd slowed to a standstill, a vacuum of silence filling the atrium. "Effective immediately, the era of soft leadership is over," she sneered, looking directly down at me. "We are cleaning house, and Harrington Global is no longer a charity for the uninspired." I watched her theatrics, marveling at the sheer volume of her ego. Ambition without integrity is like a ship with a hole in the hull. It moves fast only until it starts to sink. She was so intoxicated by the view from the mezzanine that she couldn't see the floor beneath her was already rotting. Indira gestured toward the enormous digital screens lining the lobby walls. The screens flickered, the company logo replaced by a blurrier, high-contrast image. A gasp escaped the staff. I stood tall, my knuckles white around my handbag, as I saw what she had prepared. It was a stage scandal. Fake emails and photos showing me meeting with board members of our main competitor in the city's most secluded corners. Indira was portraying me as a traitor, a daughter who had sold her inheritance for bribes. The pain of betrayal struck me like a blow to the chest, but I refused to let my knees buckle. "Zinnia Harrington has been terminated for gross misconduct and corporate espionage," Indira's voice echoed, cold and triumphant. The 1,000 judging eyes of the staff turned toward me, a mixture of shock and disappointment. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. The truth doesn't need a loudspeaker. It only needs time. I looked directly into the security camera lens, knowing she was watching the feed in real time. "You may stain my name today, Indira," I said softly, my voice carrying in the dead air. "But you cannot touch my character. You're trying to burn the house down to prove you can hold the match." The humiliation wasn't over. Indira descended the stairs, and her heels clicking like a metronome of malice. She stopped 3 feet from me and looked at the head of security. "Seize her gold ID," she ordered. "That badge belongs to someone who actually works for this family." A guard stepped forward, his face a mask of discomfort, and took the lanyard from my neck. Indira took a torchlighter from her pocket, the blue flame hissing in the silence. She held my ID card over a crystal bowl on the reception desk and pulled the trigger. The plastic began to curl and blacken, the scent of burning chemicals filling the air. She then reached for a bottle of vintage champagne that had been waiting on the desk. With a practiced pop, she poured the bubbling liquid over the melting plastic and ash. "A toast to the ghost of Zinnia Harrington," she sneered, and the champagne sizzling against the hot remnants of my identity. "You're nothing but a memory now." I looked past her and saw my mother, Cressida, standing near the elevators. She was watching, her hand pressed against her mouth, but she didn't move to stop it. She looked away the moment our eyes met. I didn't hate her for being weak. I pitied her for thinking this ritual was what strength looked like. Indira leaned in close, her breath smelling of expensive mints and bile. "Emma, this place is not yours. Get out of here. We don't like your presence," she whispered, using the name she knew I hated. I simply smiled, a calm, terrifyingly steady expression. "Keep the champagne, Indira. You'll need it to drown the regret when the bill for today finally comes due." I turned on my heel and walked toward the revolving doors. I didn't rush. A security guard, a man named Marcus, whose daughter's college tuition I had helped supplement last year, stepped forward to open the door. He leaned in as I passed, his voice a mere breath. "I'm so sorry, Miss Zinnia. We know the truth." I looked at him, my eyes softening for a fleeting second. "Don't apologize for doing your job, Marcus," I said. "Just remember that the sun always rises, no matter how long the night is." I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the Chicago wind whipping my hair across my face. I paused by the lobby fountain, the one my grandfather had commissioned to represent the flow of honest trade. I dipped my fingers in the cold water, a silent goodbye to the man who actually believed in me. The exile was over, but the predator had awakened. I stood on the sidewalk, a jobless woman with a tarnished reputation, but I had never felt so powerful. The humiliation was merely superficial, like a coat of paint on a diamond. As I stood there, Avon's black sedan pulled up at the side of the road. He looked at me through the window, his face etched with the anxiety and burden of the secrets we shared. I got into the car, the door slamming shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, muffled by the city's noise. I looked at my watch. 8:45 a.m. The charade of the job grabbing was over. "The takeover isn't just about shares, Zinnia," Avon said as we merged into the morning traffic, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. "It's about survival now. Indira didn't just fire you. She's coming for me next. She knows I'm the only one who can verify the audit trails." I looked at the skyscraper receding in the rearview mirror, its glass surface cold and indifferent. "Let her come, Avon," I replied, my voice as steady as the deep lake. "She thinks she's winning because she has the stage. She doesn't realize I'm the one who owns the theater." The transition from the gleaming glass and steel arrogance of the Harrington Tower to the sterile fluorescent misery of a Chicago emergency room was a descent into a different kind of hell. I pushed through the heavy double doors, my heels clicking on the linoleum with a hollow, lonely sound. Outside, blue and red police lights strobe flashed through the grime-streaked window blinds, rhythmically painting the walls in colors of disaster. I wasn't a corporate warrior in this moment. I was a daughter of the shadows looking for the only man who had never looked through me. I found Avon in a corner bay, his frame looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen it. He sat on the edge of the gurney, still wearing his tailored charcoal suit, but the dignity of the office had been stripped away. He held a crumpled legal notice in hands that wouldn't stop shaking, a federal indictment for embezzlement. In 4 hours, Indira hadn't just fired him. She had systematically incinerated a 40-year reputation. The high-stakes game had moved from the boardroom to a cage, and Avon was the first sacrifice. I sat beside him, my presence intended to be a silent, unshakable anchor in his rising tide of panic. He looked at me, and his eyes bloodshot and clouded with the kind of terror that only visits those who have lived upright lives. "Zinnia, they're saying I stole millions," he whispered, his voice a jagged remnant of itself. "They have bank records with my signature. Federal prison. At my age, it's a death sentence." I took the document from his trembling fingers, my gaze steady. "Integrity is not a garment you take off when the weather gets rough, Avon. It's the skin you live in. We aren't losing. We are just finding out who among us has no courage." As I spoke, my eyes drifted to the bedside table. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a small orange pill bottle with the cap loosely fitted, sitting next to a half-empty cup of tepid water. The labels were for a heavy sedative he'd been prescribed for insomnia, but the bottle was nearly empty. Indira didn't just want him gone. She wanted an early exit for the only man who could testify to the real audit trails. She was counting on his despair to bury the truth for her. I reached out, my hand moving with the precision of a scalpel, snatching the vial just as Avon's fingers twitched slightly toward it. The air in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by his ragged, broken breaths. He didn't turn away. He simply slumped, the last vestiges of resistance fading. The blinding ceiling lights highlighted every wrinkle on his face, every tear of betrayal he couldn't comprehend. In that moment, our struggle changed. It was no longer about 51% of the shares. It was about the sanctity of a human life. "You think your death would help me?" I asked, my voice low but vibrating with a fierce, protective love. And I pulled him into a hug, a rare break in the stoic wall I had built around myself for decades. He sobbed into my shoulder, a hollow sound that echoed louder than any corporate announcement. "My grandfather didn't leave me a company to rule, Avon. He left me people like you to protect. Life is the only thing we can never buy back, no matter how many shares we hold." I held him until the shaking subsided, my mind already pivoting toward a new, more dangerous strategy. Sometimes, the person who saves you is the one who refuses to let you give up on yourself. I looked him in the eyes, ensuring he saw the absolute certainty in mine. The measure of a life isn't found in how many times you win, but in how many people you refuse to leave behind. I am not leaving you. Stay silent. Stay alive and let the storm turn. I will take the heat for this. I stood by the hospital window, watching the distant glowing needle of the Harrington Tower. The rain had stopped, but the wind was howling through the city's concrete canyons like a wounded animal. My phone chimed. A taunting text from Indira. "Check the news. Your anchor is sinking. Are you ready to beg for a settlement yet?" I deleted the message without a single word of reply. Begging was for those who had something to hide. I only had something to reveal. The compassion I had felt for Avon had hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. My mother and father weren't just bystanders anymore. They were providing the ink for Indira's lies, enabling the destruction of a good man to preserve their own comfort. A family that eats its own to survive is already dead. I called my private security team. I'm instructing them to guard Avon's door 24/7. No one entered without my personal code. Not even the doctors. I contacted my attorneys, my voice a calm, rhythmic command. I didn't want a defense. I wanted a stay of prosecution based on the digital audit trails I had spent 3 years securing. We were going to move the battlefield. I walked out of the hospital, my heels clicking on the tile like a ticking clock, marking the seconds until the world stopped spinning for the rest of the Harringtons. Indira wanted a war of attrition, but she didn't realize I had already survived the worst of it. "You're going to the cemetery?" Avon asked weakly as I reached the door, his voice pulling me back for a final second. "To see your grandfather?" I stopped, my silhouette sharp and unforgiving against the hall light. I didn't look back. "Ma, no," I said, the word hanging in the air like a sentence. "To meet my father. He's there every Wednesday. It's time he sees the monster he's created." The gravel of the Harrington family cemetery crunched beneath my boots, a stark, lonely sound that echoed through the biting lake forest air. It was a Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock, and the sun was a pale, heatless disk hanging behind a skeletal canopy of leafless oaks. I wore my charcoal gray wool coat, the collar turned up against a wind that felt like it was blowing straight from the Arctic. In the distance, standing over my grandfather's white marble headstone, was the silhouette of the man who had given me life and was now systematically trying to take it back. Lazarus didn't hear me approach, or perhaps he simply didn't care. My shadow lengthened across the frostbitten grass, reaching toward him like a silent ghost. I felt a profound, chilling detachment as I watched him. This was the moment the last tether of hope finally snapped. Have you ever looked at a parent and realized they weren't a sanctuary, but a storm? I wasn't there to plead for a seat at a table that had already been burned. I was there to offer him one final exit before the wreckage became permanent. I stood beside him, the silence between us heavier than the granite monuments surrounding us. "You shouldn't have come," Lazarus said, his voice as thin and cold as the winter air. He didn't look at me. "You're an outcast here now, Zinnia. You made your choice in that dining room." I stared at the name Harrison Harrington etched into the stone, my grandfather's name. "A name is just a label." "Father," I replied, my voice carrying a quiet, unwavering dignity. But a legacy is a promise. I'm here because grandfather taught me that the strongest structures are built on truth, not on the convenience of a lie. I'm giving you a chance to save what's left. He scoffed, a jagged sound that mocked the sanctity of the ground we stood on. You're soft, just like he was. You're impractical. Indira is a necessary predator. She knows how to ensure the Harrington name remains on the skyline. I looked at him with a pity that cut deeper than anger. Call off Indira, father. Clear Avon's name. We can settle this as a family before the world watches the pedestal you've built crumble. He turned to me then, his eyes reflecting a hollow, desperate arrogance. He believed he was still the one holding the cards. The wind suddenly died down, leaving a silence so profound I could hear his steady breathing. Lazarus reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a document stamped in gold. It wasn't a company settlement agreement. It was a marriage agreement, combined with a debt settlement agreement. My knuckles turned white in my pocket. This was the final release of the illusion. The terrible burden of being sold came crashing down on me with a devastating force that almost suffocated me. I didn't cry. A woman who had lost everything had nothing left to fear. I lost 50 million in Macau, Lazarus stated, his mask of a titan slipping to reveal the sweating gambler underneath. Indira didn't just take the company to lead it. She took it to hide the losses. I've sold your hand in marriage to the Sterling family's son. It wipes the debt. If you refuse, the estate, and you, personally, will be sued into oblivion by the creditors. I stared at the paper, the ink looking like dried blood. You didn't just give the company to Indira, I whispered. You gave me a way to cover your own failures. You're not a titan, father. You're just a gambler who ran out of chips and started betting his children. I looked at my grandfather's grave, the only man who had seen my value. Love isn't supposed to have a price tag. I used to think I was the smallest person in this family, I said, my voice as steady as flint. Now I see I'm the only one who isn't for sale. You've spent your whole life pretending to be a king, but you're just a servant to your own pride. I took the contract from his hand and handed it back, unsigned. I won't pay for your sins with my life. I'd rather lose the name Harrington than lose my soul to save your ego. Lazarus's face contorted into a mask of cold fury. You'll be nothing by tomorrow, he yelled as I turned my back on him. No home, no money, no name. I kept walking, my pace steady and rhythmic. My eyes were red from the wind, but no tears fell. The invisible daughter was dead. The chairman was fully born in the graveyard of the past. There is a terrifying beauty in total freedom, the kind that only comes when the people you love the most have shown you exactly who they are. As I reached the cemetery gates, I found my mother, Cressida, waiting by her car. She looked terrified, her fingers frantically clutching her pearls. Zinnia, please, just do what he says. It's for the family. We can't lose everything. I stopped and looked at her with a heart-aching pity. The family died a long time ago, Mother. You're just living in the ruins of a house that's already burned down. I'm going to build something real now. I didn't wait for her response. I got into my car and locked the door, the click of the lock sounding like a final sentence. I picked up my phone and dialed Avon. He picked up on the first ring, his voice still shaky from the hospital. Zinnia? What happened? I stared at the crumbling stone gates of the estate in my rearview mirror. Activate the Z legacy protocols, Avon. All of them. And call the FBI. If they want a scandal, let's give them the truth. No more hiding. I felt a strange, quiet peace settle over me. Looking back, I realized that some bridges are meant to be burned so you can't be tempted to go back to the people who hurt you. Are you sure about this? Avon asked, the weight of the decision hanging over the line. Once we activate the protocols, there's no turning back. You'll be the most hated woman in Chicago by sunrise. I watched a single dry leaf flutter against the windshield before being swept away by the wind. "No, Avon," I said, my voice as cold and certain as the marble behind me. "I'll be the most honest one. Start the 48-hour blackout. I'm going off the grid." I put the car in gear and drove away from the graveyard, leaving the Harringtons to bury themselves. The rain-slicked pavement of downtown Chicago blurred into a streak of gray as I navigated the unmarked van through a labyrinth of service alleys. Every street corner camera I passed was a digital eye I had already blinded with a looping script. Yet my movements were no longer those of a daughter or a victim. They were the precise, cold calculations of an architect. I parked in a subterranean garage that didn't exist on any city map, the heavy steel door sealing shut behind me with a pneumatic hiss. This bunker, a high-tech sanctuary I'd spent 3 years building in secret, was now the only place on Earth where Zinnia Harrington truly existed. The air inside was cool, faintly scented with ozone and expensive cooling fans. I sat before a specialized encryption terminal, the rhythmic flickering of the server racks reflecting in my eyes. With a single decisive keystroke, I activated a 48-hour blackout. My old phone, credit cards, and every digital trace of my invisible daughter vanished without a trace. And I had to become a ghost to prevent my family's legal predators from sending me that disgusting marriage agreement, a contract where their love was always conditional, an agreement they could cancel the moment the profits stopped flowing in. A notification pinged on my secure monitor. Indira and Lazarus had already filed an emergency court petition. They were seeking to freeze my remaining assets, claiming I had unstable mental health, brought on by the grief of my grandfather's passing. It was a classic move from the Harrington playbook. If you can't control the person, destroy the mind. I watched the legal filing scroll past, a chillingly calm smile touching my lips. To those who have no vision, sanity always looks like madness. I wasn't hiding from them, and I was giving them the silence they deserved so they could finally hear the sound of their own ruin. The sound design of the bunker was a low, ominous synth hum that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I pulled up a split-screen feed. On the left, a security camera at Harrington HQ showed Indira frantically pacing her office, shouting into a phone. On the right, my progress bar for the final stock acquisition reached 99%. My focus was absolute. My fight wasn't just for a 51% majority. It was to stop the Harrington virus from destroying the pensions and lives of 5,000 employees. I felt the heavy, quiet burden of being the only adult left in a room full of greedy children. The bar hit 100%. At that exact moment, I discovered their next move. They had called the Chicago PD and reporting me as missing and mentally unstable, hoping to have me institutionalized before tomorrow's board meeting. They had even bribed a corrupt family doctor to sign a fake evaluation. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I simply opened a direct, secure link to the FBI's white-collar crime division. I uploaded the Macau debt records, the slave contract, and the recorded evidence of their coercion. Justice isn't a hammer that breaks things. It's a light that reveals what's already broken. I'm just turning on the sun. I completed the buyback of the last 2.2% of shares from the old guard retirees. These were the men and women Indira had planned to discard like used machinery. I didn't buy their loyalty with empty promises. I bought their freedom with a fair market price and a guarantee of their pensions. "I'm not asking you to take a side," I whispered to the digital ledger. "I'm just asking you to let me finish what my grandfather started." This was the moment where the chairman ceased to be a title and became a destiny. I stood in front of a mirror in the bunker's small living quarters, dressing for the final confrontation. I chose a structured, deep burgundy suit, the exact shade my grandfather wore to every major victory. My eyes in the reflection were clear, sharp, and utterly devoid of fear. And the betrayal by my parents had been a fire that burned away my weaknesses. leaving only the diamond-hard core of my resolve. I felt a distant, pained love for the people who raised me, a wish that they could have chosen character over comfort. But my duty of care now belonged to the law and the future, not to their fragile egos. My secure line buzzed. It was Avon. "They've scheduled a press conference for 9 tomorrow morning," he reported, his voice steady for the first time in days. "Indira is going to announce the merger and your medical leave. It's a trap, Zinnia. They have security at every entrance waiting for you." I adjusted my lapel, my reflection as sharp as a razor. "It's only a trap if you don't know it's there, Avon. To them, I am a ghost. Tomorrow, I become a haunting." I checked my grandfather's old gold pocket watch, and the gears clicking with a comforting, honest precision. The time for hiding was officially over. I exited the bunker, the cool night air of the city hitting my face like a challenge. A black sedan was waiting, its engine idling in a low, predatory growl. I stepped into the back seat, the door closing with a heavy thud that signaled the end of my exile. "Target, Harrington Tower," I told the driver. "And make sure the press is already in the boardroom. I want the whole world to see the audit." The city lights blurred past, a million glowing witnesses to a war they didn't know was being fought. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes curious but respectful. "Are you ready to see their faces when the elevator doors open, ma'am?" I looked at my reflection in the window, my eyes like flint in the passing streetlights. "I'm ready for them to finally see me," I said, my voice as calm as the deep lake. Not as a daughter, but as the owner. The morning sun over Lake Michigan was a blinding silver blade, cutting through the smog of the city as the sedan pulled up to the curb of Harrington Tower. I looked up at the 30th floor, the glass surface reflecting a sky that felt as vast as my resolve. This was the summit. The air in the lobby was different today. No longer electric with fear, but heavy with the stagnant breath of a dying regime. I adjusted the collar of my burgundy suit, a shade that felt like a silent conversation with my grandfather. True power isn't the ability to command others. It's the ability to command oneself when the world is screaming. Upstairs, the boardroom was a stage set for a funeral disguised as a coronation. Above floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago, but the people inside were looking only at the merger agreement lying on the mahogany table. Indira sat at the head, her posture radiating a toxic, predatory triumph. Lazarus sat to her right, his face a mask of hollow relief, while Cressida obsessively avoided looking at the empty chair where I should have been. Flashbulbs from the invited press popped rhythmically, capturing the exact moment the Harringtons prepared to sign away their soul. "Thank you all for being here," Indira began, her voice carrying a feigned, tearful tremor that turned my stomach. "As many of you know, my younger sister Zinnia has been placed on an unfortunate medical leave due to a mental instability following our family's recent loss." I watched through a hidden feed on my phone as she played the grieving sister for the cameras. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Lazarus prepared to co-sign the documents, handing Indira the master encryption key to the company's internal servers, a symbolic surrender of the kingdom. Indira leaned back, her eyes gleaming with sharp arrogance. She began to mock our grandfather's humanistic legacy, calling his concern for employee welfare a mental burden that reduced profits. She was convinced I had been so erased that I didn't recognize the shadow on the other side of the main door as myself. The arrogance of usurpers is always their biggest blind spot. They think they've won because they have the microphone. But they forget the stage is just wood and nails until someone speaks the truth. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room swung open with a definitive thundering crack. The cameras turned, lenses refocusing in a blur of motion. I walked in, the rhythmic click of my heels on the hardwood the only sound in a room that had suddenly lost its oxygen. I wasn't alone. behind me walked a phalanx of 20 high-powered attorneys and a federal marshal. The vacuum-like silence was so intense I could hear Indira's breath hitch. Her face went from triumphant to a sickly ashen gray in the span of a heartbeat. "Zinnia, you're trespassing!" Indira shrieked, her voice cracking as she scrambled to her feet. "Security! Remove this delusional woman immediately!" She tried to use the momentum of her victory banquet to bury me one last time. But the federal marshal stepped forward, his badge a silent rebuke to her authority. I didn't look at the cameras, and I didn't look at the security. I looked at the table. I placed my digital tablet on the mahogany surface, and with a swipe, I overrode the boardroom's main display. The SEC filing appeared in glowing white text. Z Legacy Capital. 51.2% ownership stake. The gasps from the board members were a symphony I had waited 3 years to hear. I looked Indira directly in the eye, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You cannot sign a merger for a company you don't control, Indira. My parents gave you 49% of their pride. I bought 51% of the actual corporation while you were busy picking out your new office furniture." The federal marshal handed Indira a document, his face as stoic as my own. "Effective 3 minutes ago, your CEO credentials have been suspended pending a federal investigation," he stated. I watched the paper tremble in her hand. My parents looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just walked through their walls. The hardest part of winning isn't defeating your enemies. It's remembering not to become them in the process. I felt no joy in their panic, only the heavy, quiet satisfaction of a job done with integrity. I walked to the head of the table. Indira was frozen, her hands still hovering over the merger agreement she would never sign. Lazarus stood up, his face turning a dangerous, mottled red, but he remained silent, pinned down by the sheer legal weight of the team behind me. I didn't sit in the CEO chair. I stood, looking at my family with a gaze of surgical compassion. Grandfather Harrison didn't build this company on greed, I addressed the board. He built it on trust. Today, we are returning to our foundations. I turned to Lazarus and spoke in a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "I'm not doing this because I hate you, Father. I'm doing this because I love the truth more than I fear your disapproval. You were willing to sell my life to cover your debts, but I was willing to save this company to preserve your name." I signaled my IT team to lock the internal servers. Indira had been planning to delete the evidence of her embezzlement the moment the merger was signed. She was too late. The light was finally on. I turned back to the press, the lenses capturing the burgundy of my suit and the flint in my eyes. "The press conference is over," I announced, my voice steady and rhythmic. The Harrington era of secrets is finished, but the audit is just beginning." I looked at Lazarus and Indira, who were now flanked by my legal team. "Father, Indira, we need to discuss the Macau debts in private. I believe the federal marshal has some questions about the wire transfers." The boardroom fell into a vacuum of silence, the only sound the distant, muffled siren of a Chicago squad car 30 floors below. I watched the federal marshal's hand descend, pressing a red evidence seal across the gold-stamped marriage contract, the slave contract that had been intended to trade my life for a gambler's debt. The overhead lights seemed to dim, casting a long, sharp shadow of my silhouette against the glass windows. Lazarus and Indira sat frozen, their faces crumbling like ancient statues hitting the pavement. For 32 years, and I had been the invisible daughter, but today the law spoke with my voice. I laid out the final evidence with a rhythmic, surgical precision. The audit trails were undeniable. Lazarus had systematically drained corporate pension funds to collateralize his Macau debts, and Indira had forged the wire transfers to bury the trail. This was the fiduciary breach that would end them. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I felt a weary, profound sadness for the people they could have been if they hadn't been blinded by their own greed. The tension of a lifetime of neglect was finally released, not through a scream, but through the indisputable clarity of the truth. "We are family," Lazarus stammered, his voice a ghost of its former authority. "You wouldn't put your own father in prison." I looked at him, truly seeing the hollow man beneath the expensive wool suit. "The law is blind to blood, father, and it only sees the signatures you left behind." I pushed a settlement agreement across the table. It was their only exit. Relinquish all voting rights, divest every property claim, and step away forever. Or face a federal indictment for racketeering that would ensure they never saw the sun outside a cage again. Cressida, my mother, collapsed into a fit of jagged sobs, her pearls clattering against the mahogany table. I didn't mock her. I didn't offer a hollow comfort. "Crying over the consequences won't change the choices that led to them, Mother," I said softly. "I'm not doing this to destroy you. I'm doing this so you can finally stop pretending to be something you're not." Lazarus stared at the pen as if it were a poisonous snake. Then, with a hand that shook so violently the ink splattered, and he signed away the kingdom he had already lost. He was no longer a chairman. He was just a man with a debt he could never repay. 1 month later, the cold glass of the skyscraper felt like a past life. I drove an hour west, past the manicured lawns of Lake Forest, until the roads turned to gravel, and the air smelled of damp earth and prairie grass. I pulled up to a weathered, modest cottage nestled under a cluster of ancient pines. I stepped out, carrying a grocery bag with simple essentials: bread, milk, fruit. Lazarus and Cressida were waiting on the porch, looking aged and strangely small without their designer labels and corporate armor. I placed the bag on the kitchen table, the scent of pine and old wood filling the room. This was the stoic justice I had chosen. Thus I had bought back the Harrington family name and converted the grand estate into a public historical foundation to honor the grandfather they had tried to erase. In return, I had moved my parents here, providing them with a monthly allowance equal to the very blue-collar pension they had nearly stolen from their employees. It was a fair reality, a structured peace that forced them to confront the humanity they had long ignored. "This is an insult," Lazarus muttered, gesturing to the modest kitchen. "A Harrington living like a common worker." I looked at him with a genuine, quiet kindness that seemed to unsettle him more than any threat. "You always said the people at the bottom didn't matter, Father. Now, you have the opportunity to see how important they really are. This isn't a punishment, it's an education. You finally have the chance to be honest. Success is not about how much you collect, but how much you protect." I had protected the legacy they were willing to sell. I had restored Avon's reputation, appointing him chairman emeritus of the restructured firm. I told my parents about him before I left. "Avon stayed loyal when you offered him nothing. You stayed loyal only to your own greed. I know which one I'd rather be." They had no rebuttal. The silence in the cottage was heavy, but it was a clean silence. For the first time, there were no secrets left to rot in the walls. I walked out of the cottage and toward my sedan. The Illinois plains stretched out before me, the horizon glowing with a pale, hopeful gold. I pulled over by the edge of a small lake, the wind blowing my hair as I looked at an old, faded photograph of my grandfather. And I felt a lightness in my chest that made the air feel easier to breathe. I didn't need their apology to be whole. I had built my own closure. I used to wait for a seat at their table, but now, I've built a table where every voice is heard and every life has value. My phone buzzed. A call from the board. "Chairman Zinnia, the restructuring is complete. What is our first directive?" I looked at the vast open sky, feeling a total, beautiful liberation. "Our first directive is to be human," I replied. "Everything else follows." I looked into the distance, as if speaking to every woman who had ever been told she was too small to matter. She didn't win by being loud. She won by being undeniable. If you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of a family's betrayal, you know that the greatest revenge is simply outgrowing the people who tried to keep you small. I started the car and began driving back towards the city. The Harrington name had vanished from the building, replaced by a simple, elegant logo, symbolizing the future, not the past. I wasn't just a CEO. I wasn't just a daughter. Finally, I was completely free. "Is that all?" Lazarus asked from the porch as I walked away, his voice soft in the wind. "Are you leaving us here?" I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the vast blue horizon. "No, Father," I whispered to the empty car. "I'm leaving you the truth. You don't have to lie. That's the greatest gift I can give you."